The sun hung low over the rugged hills of Komodo Island, turning the sky into a canvas of molten gold and crimson. Heat waves danced above the cracked earth, and the air carried a faint scent of salt from the distant sea. In that endless silence, broken only by the cry of unseen birds, a solitary man walked, Artem Volkov, a hunter who had traveled farther than he ever imagined. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his weathered face marked by years of chasing the world's deadliest creatures. His rifle rested across his back like a loyal companion, its steel glinting beneath the harsh light. Each step he took crunched over dry twigs and brittle leaves, echoing in the stillness. For years, Artem had hunted for sport, lions in Africa, tigers in India, wolves in Siberia. His name had become known in circles of men who prized trophies and courage. Yet as he walked through the burning landscape of Komodo, something in his heart felt heavier than his rifle. He had come here not for fame or glory, but because of a plea. A group of villagers had reached out to him, humble fishermen and farmers whose lives were being torn apart by a predator they could not fight. Their livestock had vanished, and one boy had been badly injured. Fear gripped the island like a shadow, and so they had called Artem, the man who never missed his shot. But as he neared the heart of the island, the hunter began to question his purpose. The jungle around him was alive, breathing, ancient and untamed. Every rustle in the brush, every whisper of the wind felt like a warning. It wasn't the ordinary wilderness he knew, it was a world where nature ruled and man was merely a visitor. The air grew thicker, humid, almost suffocating. The cries of cicadas pierced the silence. Somewhere far away, a deep guttural sound rolled through the trees, not a roar, not a hiss, but something older, deeper. Artem froze. His instincts sharpened. His hand moved to his rifle. He had heard stories about the Komodo dragon, the last living descendant of prehistoric monsters. Powerful, venomous, and patient. It didn't chase its prey, it waited. It watched. And when the moment came, it struck with terrifying precision. Artem's pulse quickened. The island felt alive, as if it were testing him. He glanced up at the smoking volcano in the distance, its faint plume drifting against the sky. The locals called it Gunning-a-Pee, the Fire Mountain. They said it was the heart of the island, and that those who killed without respect never left its shadow unchanged. He took a deep breath, feeling sweat roll down his neck. Just one shot, he murmured to himself. But even as he said the words, doubt crept into his chest. For the first time in his long career, Artem wasn't sure whether he was hunting the dragon, or whether the island itself was hunting him. The morning light broke through the canopy in thin, trembling lines, spilling golden threads across the jungle floor. Artem moved carefully, his boots sinking into the damp soil with every step. The air was thick with the scent of moss and decay, the living breath of the wild. Somewhere nearby, a branch snapped. He froze. A rustling sound came from the shadows, slow and deliberate. Artem crouched low, his hand steady on his rifle. Through the leaves, his sharp eyes caught a flicker of movement, a ripple of brown and gray scales, glinting like polished stone. His breath hitched. There it was. The Komodo dragon emerged from the underbrush, its enormous body moving with a terrible grace. Sunlight slid over its skin like water over armor. Its tongue flicked out, tasting the air, sensing him. Artem had hunted tigers, crocodiles, and bears, but this creature was something else. There was no fear in its eyes, only an ancient patience, the cold, calculating stare of a predator that had survived for millions of years. He raised his rifle slowly, taking aim. Through the scope, he could see every scar, every ridge, every breath the beast drew. The villagers, words echoed in his mind. It comes at night, it takes what it wants. We can't stop it. He steadied his finger on the trigger. But then, something shifted. A faint sound, soft, almost fragile, broke the tension. A whimper, not the deep growl of a beast, but the cry of something young. Artem blinked, lowering his scope slightly. Beside the great dragon, barely visible under a tangle of roots, were two tiny hatchlings. They were weak and thin, their skin pale and their eyes wide with hunger. One nudged at its mother's tail, while the other let out another small, pitiful cry. The hunter's heart stuttered. The rifle in his hand suddenly felt heavier. He had expected to find a monster, a cold-blooded killer. But what he saw now was something else. A mother, a protector, For a long, suspended moment, Artem couldn't move. His mind drifted back to a memory. His son, barely 8 years old, standing in their backyard in Russia, holding a wooden toy rifle. "Papa, do animals cry?" the boy had asked. Artem had laughed then, brushing the question aside. But now, staring at the Komodo and her young, he realized the truth. They didn't cry with tears, but with their silence, their fear, their will to survive. The dragon's gaze met his. In those dark, ancient eyes, Artem saw no malice, only instinct. She was not hunting for sport or pleasure. She was doing what he had done all his life, protecting what she loved. His finger trembled on the trigger. Slowly, he exhaled, and lowered the rifle. The wind stirred the trees. The mother Komodo turned, nudging her young toward the shadows. In a heartbeat, they vanished into the jungle, leaving only the faint imprint of scales in the dirt. Artem stood there, surrounded by silence. For the first time in years, the hunter didn't feel powerful. He felt human, and deep within his chest, something old, something he thought he'd lost, began to stir again. Compassion. The jungle awoke with the slow rhythm of a living heartbeat. Cicadas sang from the trees, and the wind carried the distant murmur of the sea. Artem crouched in the shadows, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the narrow clearing ahead. He had followed the Komodo dragon's trail since dawn, wide, heavy prints in the soil, leading him deeper into the wilderness. Every instinct in him screamed to stay alert. The island had no mercy for the careless. The sun beat down like fire, and the air shimmered with heat. Somewhere nearby, a goat bleated, a sound of fear. Then, it happened. A sudden rustle, a blur of motion, and the Komodo dragon emerged from the brush, muscles rippling under its thick hide. It moved low and silent, a ghost of prehistoric power. Its tongue flicked, tasting the scent of prey. The goat stumbled backward, tethered and helpless. Artem's hands tightened around the rifle. He could feel the weight of the villagers, hopes pressing down on him, their fear, their trust. He knew that if the dragon struck, it could kill in moments. Venom, teeth, raw strength, nature's perfect weapon. He lifted the rifle, sighting down the scope. The dragon took another step. His finger found the trigger. But then, he hesitated. Through the scope, he saw again what he couldn't forget. The small, fragile shapes that had hidden beneath their mother's tail. The babies, hungry, waiting, dependent. He remembered his son's voice once more, that innocent question echoing through time. "Papa, do animals cry?" The answer filled his heart now. Yes, in their silence, they cried. In their hunger, their fear, their love. The dragon lunged, the goat screamed, and in that split second, Artem made his choice. He didn't aim for the heart. He aimed for the ground. Bang! The gunshot shattered the stillness, echoing off the cliffs. Dust exploded around the dragon's claws, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the dirt. Startled, the creature froze, hissing in confusion. Its tongue flicked wildly, tasting danger. Another crack of a branch, another cry from the goat, and the Komodo turned away. It backed off slowly, watching Artem with wary eyes. Then, with a flick of its tail, it disappeared into the trees, back toward the wild, back toward its young. Artem lowered his rifle. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the storm inside his chest. From behind him, voices rose, the villagers, who had followed quietly at a distance. They stared in disbelief. "Why didn't you kill it?" one asked, his voice sharp. Artem turned, his face calm but weary. "Because it wasn't hunting for sport," he said softly. "It was hunting for survival." Silence fell. Even the forest seemed to pause. For the first time, the villagers looked at the jungle not as an enemy, but as something alive, something that shared their struggle to exist. Artem looked down at his rifle, smoke still curling from its barrel. For years, that weapon had been his pride, his proof of skill. Now, it felt like a confession. He had fired the perfect shot, not to take a life, but to save one. The days that followed were quieter. The jungle, once filled with tension, seemed to breathe more gently now. Artem remained in the village, helping where he could. The people, who had first looked at him as a savior with a gun, now saw something different, a man who had come to understand the island rather than conquer it. Each morning, he walked with the villagers to check the goat pens. Together, They reinforced the fences, repaired weak spots, and built wooden barriers strong enough to keep the predators out. The men learned to store food safely, away from the smell that drew the dragons near. The women, once afraid to step beyond their homes, began to gather herbs and fruit again. Life slowly returned to a calm rhythm. But Artem wasn't the same man anymore. The stillness of the island had carved something new inside him. At night, as he sat by the fire, he listened to the distant sounds of the forest, the whisper of leaves, the low call of owls, the soft hiss of the wind against the mountains. He realized that the jungle was not cruel, it was honest. It took what it needed, and gave what it could. One evening, as the sky burned orange and violet, a small boy from the village sat beside him. "Hunter," the boy asked shyly, "why didn't you kill the dragon?" Artem smiled faintly, staring into the flames. "Because sometimes," he said, "you learn more from what you spare than from what you destroy." The boy nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of the words. Days turned into weeks. The villagers grew confident again. No livestock were lost. The forest seemed to watch in silence, as if acknowledging the fragile peace. Then, one evening, as the tide rolled in and the air cooled with the scent of rain, something extraordinary happened. Artem was walking along the edge of the jungle when he felt it, that old, familiar tension. He turned slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for his side, though his rifle was no longer there. From the shadows emerged a figure, massive, powerful, and silent. The Komodo dragon, the same one. Its black eyes reflected the fading sunlight. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, the dragon took a slow step forward, its head low, its tongue flicking. Artem stood still, his breath calm. Behind the dragon, he saw movement. Two smaller shapes, the hatchlings, now stronger, walking beside her. A strange peace filled him. There was no fear, no threat, only understanding. The dragon lingered a moment longer, then turned and vanished back into the trees. Artem watched until the last sound faded into the dusk. He felt something he hadn't in years, forgiveness. Not from others, but from the wild itself. He looked toward the mountains, where the volcano smoked faintly against the stars, and whispered to the wind, "I came here to end a life, but instead, I found my own again." And in that moment, under the endless Komodo sky, the hunter understood the wild, not as an enemy to defeat, but as a teacher to respect. Morning came quietly, with the kind of calm that only follows storms of the soul. The ocean shimmered in soft silver light, and the waves whispered against the sand like a gentle farewell. Artem stood alone on the beach, the rifle slung across his back one last time. The wind tugged at his shirt, carrying with it the scent of salt, smoke, and distant rain. The villagers had gathered earlier to thank him. They offered food, smiles, and handshakes, not out of duty, but gratitude. He had come to their island as a hunter, but he was leaving as something else. A friend, a protector, a reminder that not all battles must end in blood. Now, as he stood before the vast blue horizon, Artem looked down at his rifle. The metal was scratched and worn, its barrel dull from years of use. It had been his pride, his armor, his way of proving his worth. Every notch on it told a story, victories, trophies, conquests. But each of those stories felt small now, fragile compared to what he had found on this island. He could still see the Komodo dragon in his mind's eye, the way she had looked at him before fading into the forest. That moment had changed him forever. It had stripped away everything he thought he knew about strength, leaving only truth. Artem knelt down slowly, pressing his palm into the sand. It was warm, alive. He placed the rifle before him, its weight sinking slightly into the earth. He ran his fingers along the barrel, then smiled, a small, quiet smile that came from peace, not pride. For years, he whispered, his voice barely rising above the wind, I believed courage was about pulling the trigger. But now I know, the bravest shot is the one you don't take. He stood up, feeling the sun rise higher behind him. The light spread over the sea, painting the waves gold. For the first time in years, his shoulders felt light. The burden of the hunter, the endless chase, the hunger for glory, had fallen away. As he walked along the shore, the children of the village waved from a distance. They ran after him, laughing, calling his name. Artem turned, smiling warmly, his eyes soft. One boy, The same child who had once asked why he didn't kill the dragon, ran up and handed him a small seashell. "For you," the boy said, grinning. "So you don't forget us." Artem took it gently, his voice catching. "No," he said softly. "I'll never forget." He tucked the shell into his pocket, then looked one last time at the island, the mountains, the trees, the wild heart that had changed his own. As he boarded the small fishing boat that would take him home, a final gust of wind swept across the sea. It carried with it the call of the jungle, distant but clear, the voice of life, ancient and free. Artem closed his eyes and smiled. He had come as a hunter seeking to prove his strength. He left as a man who had discovered something far greater, the power of mercy. And as the boat drifted away from the shore, the rifle remained behind in the sand, half buried, glinting softly in the sunlight, a silent monument to the heart that had learned to miss. A shot.